Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Magicians. Quite a few things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, there's a whole situation in Fillory. It's kind of interesting because this episode was kind of like our first time really seeing like how much has really changed in Fillory subsequently since, season 3's finale, magic came back and everything, because we find out like, oh yeah, there was a Lorian civil war, but Indri ended up losing to apparently his sister, and now there's like a West Loria. So I guess that, because it's also like, because there's plants that are growing there that are, they're Lorian flowers in particular, but they are kind of what make all the talking animals not be able to talk anymore. So they have to talk to this lady Pike, who has these beets, which they could use those beets to make juice, and that juice could reverse the effects and stuff like that. But the lady didn't really like Margot because Margot didn't know much about her. It's kind of like, oh, like you're Fillorians, you're here in Fillory, you don't care about us and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's still kind of like, to be fair, she was going through a lot of stuff and she wouldn't know the ins and out of a lot of stuff. But Margot's kind of all about fire and brimstone. But it's like, hey, Elliot would be a little diplomatic, but it's like, Elliot's not here. I handle things my way, but Josh was able to kind of talk her down, which is kind of cute. That the fact is that she is willing to listen to Josh because, she's like, the fact is I didn't win, through democracy. I won just because I ended up talking to a talking bear about his Syfy. And Josh was like, hey, that in itself is democracy. Not democracy, diplomacy. I kept saying democracy, didn't I? Nevertheless, the fact of the matter is, she was willing to listen to Josh to the point. I thought that conversation between her and Pike was kind of interesting. The whole like alpaca situation of being like, oh yeah, people think of them as misbehaved, but the fact of the matter is they, are very self-conscious because like you get shaved 2 or 3 times a year and have to be naked and stuff like that. It causes some issues, and I'm like, oh, that's such an interesting way to look at that. I also love that Margot had to drink that alpaca milk too, and she was just kind of like, so good. It's like she had this lady literally eating out the palm of her hand, but it's kind of like, Margot kind of slipped back into herself a little bit. It's just like, ooh, I just want to skin her alive, essentially, or something like that. And Josh was able to pull her back, be like, no, you're doing good. The fact of the matter is, you got this, you're great at this, and you saw her kind of pepping up. But that all changed when Josh made the comment of, you're out Ellioting Elliot. And that pissed Margot off because it's like, for one, like losing Elliot has kind of left her a little, fractured. Because the fact of the matter is, Josh made a point of like, oh man, because of the animals not being able to talk, we can't use the bunnies, and it's like, oh, they'd have gotten a message from Quentin that, hey, that Elliot is still alive inside of the creature. So, and, Margot handled things her own way. It's like, hey, you help us out or I'm going to skin all them damn alpacas you care so much about. But, and she ends up snapping at Josh, telling him, it's like, how dare you? The fact is, I'm not looking for a replacement and partner in crime. I'm not trying to do things like Elliot because, like, you telling me to do things like Elliot is just like me trying to replace him. It's just kind of, because obviously, like, she's grieving in her own way. But, like, that whole last thing that happened last episode where Finn was kind of like, oh, have you cried? And she's like, I don't have time to cry because if I do, I'm never going to stop. And, like I said, this is her just kind of lashing out because she's hurting. And she kind of ends up hurting Josh by being like, hey, like, kind of don't get it twisted about what our situation is and stuff like that. He's like, oh, I thought we were friends on the way to me being your boyfriend. She's like, Josh, it's like, he's like, no, I get it. I do know the true you, Margot. And it's sad because, because even Margot was kind of like, caring about people is something, it's kind of hard for her, because, to be fair, it's like, the one person in the world she's ever cared about the most is gone, that being Elliot. Like, I think Elliot kind of brought some balance to her. But, Margot's shown that she can have her caring side as well. But I think it's just, she's so grief-stricken right now that she's just lashing out at anyone and everyone. Because she needs to vent. Because she's not letting it out. Like, it's popping out another, she's got stuff buried so deep. Like, she's bursting at the seams, essentially, So it's kind of sad because I'm like, oh, her and Josh are so cute together and everything. And I was kind of hoping like, oh, more would come from that. Maybe, hopefully things could turn back around afterwards. But, I mean, this might be playing into what Lord Fresh was talking about. Her birthright was basically she would learn what it is to rule alone. And I guess the whole point is, like, she's going to be struggling to get the animals' voices back so she can find out her birthright. But it's kind of like a fulfilling prophecy of, like, her so desperate to get these answers. And she's dealing with all of this that she ends up finding out, like, oh, yeah, I'm going to end up ruling alone because I pushed everyone away and all of this. So it's kind of like, that's going to be the lesson she ends up potentially learning in all of this. That might be kind of the end of it all. Or maybe it is supposed to be representative of the fact is that it's supposed to be the fact is that maybe that when it's all said and done, Elliot won't make it back from this, and maybe Josh won't either, and just no one will. That basically the people she is closest to will end up being dead at the end of this, whether it be from the creature or something else, So that's where my mindset is on that. We'll have to wait and see, like, what ends up happening in that regard. Then another regard of situations is the whole Alice thing. Alice ends up meeting a lady, Sheila. Turns out, hey, Sheila's a magician, but she didn't know about magicians. And Alice is reluctant to teach her. It's so interesting because Sheila represents that wonderment that Quentin always had when he first found out. Like, he's always had about magic. She kind of has that because it's like, yeah, I've kind of messed up a little bit here in my life, but it's like, hey, I can actually use this and do some good. Alice herself used to have that wonderment, but it almost feels like a lifetime ago that she had that because for her, it's like magic has, in her eyes, caused more harm than good. It's just kind of like, that's why she's reluctant to bring it into someone else's life because it's like, it's just going to implode your life like it did mine. Like, because she looks at magic as more of a curse than a blessing anymore. I mean, it's just, to be fair, magic has taken a lot from her. She's tried to do a lot with magic, and it's just, there's always kind of a price with this whole situation. But, in the end, they were able to do good. They were able to, hey, one small step was kind of like, hey, clearing the lead from the water and everything. It just took them opening one of the pipes that the librarians have around, which is also interesting that they came at, I guess they always had their eye on Sheila because she had talked about the fact that it's been a couple months when her magic kind of really kicked in and stuff like that, but it's kind of essentially like you've made your mistakes, and it's just kind of like certain things, like you've messed up this and stuff has kind of always been hard or whatever, or things haven't always worked out. It's just kind of like, that's the way things are. You have to kind of find a way to not necessarily just live with it. I guess that's one way of kind of looking at it. Like, you can't change what's kind of happened really, but all you can do is go for it and try and make the best out of a shitty situation is kind of how I'm, interpreting it in that regard. And I think that's kind of an interesting storyline to have for Alice because Alice has been so reluctant with coming to magic. So it's like, this is where she's meant to be because this is where, I mean, it's hard to say in the grand scheme of things. Like, you can make the argument, it's like, this is where she's meant to be because, like, when she's seeing the kids playing with the water from the fire hydrant, it's like, I did good. My magic did good. It made her feel proud of herself of like, okay, so maybe it changed her mind about magic not being all bad, and putting her in that mindset again that magic isn't all bad will push her further to do magic more and do good with it, Because the thing is, at the end of the day, she doesn't trust herself with magic. It's always been a thing, and not just herself, but when she sees the way other people have used magic to do bad. I mean, when you look at literally Martin Chapman, the Beast, it makes you go, okay, so you definitely see that side of things. So it's interesting to see what ends up happening after this, because obviously, like, there were some hedge witches that blew up the library. Some of the library people came after Sheila because they figured she was behind all this, which I think is kind of interesting because apparently, like, the type of magic she does is very rare. Like, the fact is, because she was even able to find a kind of sense out the magic pipeline like that. So it's interesting. I guess it makes sense in the end because I forget, because that's exactly what the, I guess, dude that was sent by the gods at the end of season 2 to shut off, magic and stuff like that. He popped open one of those. Obviously, like, this one's gold, so maybe that's supposed to be representative of the library being, like, I guess because they've set up their own pipelines all across the world, so maybe that's what that's supposed to be. I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting detail like that, because that one he turned off in Break Bills, that was just him just turning the magic off all around the world with that one switch, I guess. Or was it just him turning off the one in that particular area? I guess that pipeline system was always there about magic, and he just maybe went around and just took them all out one by one, and we just saw what happened at Break Bills. Maybe he went to other areas around Earth to do it too. Nevertheless, I doubt it was that big of a detail, but I just thought it was just kind of interesting. But I'm curious to see what they end up doing with Sheila. They'll probably try and punish her. She might get locked up for a very long time. I doubt they'll outright kill her, but you can't really say for sure when it comes to the library what they're capable of doing. But I'm assuming they're going to lock her up for it. And, you know, once again, it's like, what's that going to do for Alice? Because Alice thought, hey, I finally did good. And now she's going to realize, like, holy crap, magic is terrible. You know, it's like, you know, I'm curious to see what they ultimately end up doing with all of that. It's kind of interesting when you like take all of this and you look at the fact is, oh, she also met Santa Claus, which is kind of like Santa Claus represents kind of like the good of magic, I guess, you know. So you could definitely, now looking in retrospect, it's like you can definitely tell what direction they're trying to take Alice's storyline, her character growth, what direction they're taking it. What I'm curious is like, I mean, I doubt it's going to be like a very easy path. It's probably going to be a lot of bumps along the road, and I'm curious to see how that ends up like playing out for her and what that means for the overarching story. There's the interesting thing of like, oh yeah, Penny and Morena got kidnapped. I thought the dude that came after Morena, I was like, oh, I thought that was like having something to do with like all the bad luck they had given to Morena or something like that. Like someone coming after her because of stuff that Morena 40 did or something like that. It's like, no. Turns out this dude, Daniel, kidnapped them because they're from an alternate timeline, and them being in this timeline is screwing with a spell that he's got going on. I didn't, because I was like, oh, they must have went somewhere else. It's like, no, it turns out they went to timeline 23 apparently, which is interesting. But it turns out like the whole situation is Daniel's mom was making this device, and basically by the byproduct of it, she ended up making herself very sick. Essentially, it kind of gives you like, as Penny kind of put it, clockwork dementia or Alzheimer's, and basically your brain loses track of when and where in time it is, and you kind of get stuck like that until you die. It kind of, you know, which is kind of a terrible way to kind of go about things. But this is all about Daniel saving his mom, because he uses this spell to kind of keep her grounded, and with these particular watches. But the energy, the frequency that they give off, because the frequency of them being from a different timeline doesn't mesh with the frequency of their 23 timeline frequency off their bodies, doesn't mesh with the 40 timeline. So it kind of screws up the spell that Daniel was having in the timeline 40. So his mom was going back to dying. That's why he was trying to send them back to timeline 23. Also, we ended up learning this interesting thing, like Morena actually has a girlfriend, which is kind of interesting. It's like, huh, I don't know, I mean, even Penny's kind of like, you're kind of a terrible person. I can't believe there's actually someone that likes you. But it turns out it's because Morena was dating someone in timeline 23. Things didn't work out. So here in timeline 40, it's like, oh, I know all the things that kind of screwed up our relationship, so I'm just using that to our advantage. Even Penny's like, kind of like, isn't that a little messed up? Which I think stuff like that is kind of messed up. I'm going to go into a little tangent, but I won't really go into it. But the fact is, it is kind of interesting, because it's like you're taking all this stuff you know about someone from a different timeline and you're trying to date them in the current timeline. It's a little gross in that regard, you know? Which I thought like the whole thing was like Penny was trying to do the same thing with Julia, but I guess in retrospect, like, yeah, there's been something there, but I don't think he's outright been taking those steps towards him and Julia being a thing. So I guess that's kind of the difference there. Because I think for Penny, he never once looked at his timeline as his. It's just kind of like, once again, a refugee in this timeline. But Morena, being kind of selfish as she is, even kind of suggesting, why don't we just kill Daniel? He's like, no, the dude's literally just trying to save his mom. It's like, oh, who cares? Moms die all the time. It's like, jeez, Morena. It's like, no matter what timeline. I mean, it seemed like, hey, maybe timeline 40 Morena was kind of good, but that's just because her relationship with Julia was good. That doesn't mean she was in general good with other people. So, but the fact is that it turns out Penny 23 and Penny 40 met. I was like, whoa. Not what I was expecting in that regard. That's really interesting. But he kind of set that whole thing up, and it's like, Penny 40 is kind of interesting. Like, obviously, like, everything Hades said to him in season 3 of like, oh yeah, stay here and learn. There's so much more at play here. I wonder, does any of this have to do with Cassandra at all either? Because that's a storyline we still have not gone back to, about who she is and why does she look like Alice. That's something we still haven't tackled yet. And she's the reason why all the books exist. So that makes me think it has to have something to do with the fact is that Penny, 40 is as knowledgeable as he is, because he's telling Penny 23 is like, hey, you need to stay in timeline 40. He's like, that's not my timeline. Those people are my people. It's like, yeah, but you need to be there, because for what's about to go down, you need to be there. It's important. It's vastly important. So it's like, this has to be connected to that creature, just everything that's going down, because I guess this is going to be a pivotal moment in this universe of something that's going down. And even telling Penny is like, when the time comes, you have to tell him yes. And part of me thinks like, is that referencing Quentin? I kind of feel like Quentin's kind of at the centerfold of all of this, or maybe it's something connected to the creature. When the creature says something to you, you have to say yes. I'm gonna lean with Quentin, but it might be something else. Maybe I missed something in the conversation, there's a good chance of that, just because I have a tendency to do that. But yeah, I mean, he's very secretive about what he. I guess because the whole thing is, it's like if he tells you everything, you might screw up the grand design of everything. So it's like things have to play out a certain way. But for him, it's like, it's not my timeline anymore. Because Penny 23 is like, they don't want me. Katie doesn't want me. They don't want me. They want you. And he's like, that's not my timeline anymore. But when you see Katie, tell her I love her and I'm sorry. And it's just kind of sad. But it seems like things are working out for Penny 40 in a certain regard. I mean, it's kind of interesting because he's there, kind of cool, calm, and collected. It's like, that's not the Penny we know. That, you know, I mean, at least even Penny 23, like, it's a little bit of the Penny 40, but it's like, obviously, he's a lot cooler and calmer, because usually Penny's just very, like, irritable, which even this Penny is. He just kind of gets a lot of, like, whatever type of mentality he has a lot. But this Penny, we don't see him very angry. He seems calm, cool, and collected, like he knows everything. I guess that's always been Penny's thing of just trying to find his place, and for the first time in a long time, he found it. He thought his place was with Katie, but now it seems like it's not the case. So the fact is that he's willing to abandon everything must mean that this is important, even Katie, because he's always fought tooth and nail, you know, to get back to Katie and everything, because she is so important to him. So I'm so curious. I guess we won't ever get to really 100% see what he went through. Maybe they'll cover it later on in the season, but I'd be very interested to find out, like, what he knows. It probably won't come up until stuff starts really, really heating up, when we kind of get to what he sent Penny 23 to kind of be a part of and everything. So, and the sad thing is with the whole Daniel situation is that Penny 23 was like, yeah, I'm sorry, this is our timeline. So he ends up scattering dandelions from a different timeline. So it's like, yeah, multiple dandelions, in fact. And it's like, you'll never be able to find all of them, because you would need to find all of them, every trace of something from a different timeline, and remove it for your mom to be okay again. Like, Penny knows that this will be killing his mom, but it's kind of like, Sonya's condition is terminal. There was no fixing it. So it's kind of like, this Penny 23 being here in his timeline is more important, because I guess, you know, it's one of those things of like, it's more important than just one life, you know. So it's just sad that it's coming down to it. I'm curious to see what Daniel ends up doing because of that. We might see him kind of pop up later on. Maybe not. In retrospect, like, that's the first time I've ever referenced that timeline being like that, where like everything's anti-magic. I'd assume that was timeline 23, because didn't they say that was, or was that a different timeline? I could have sworn they were saying that was like timeline 23, but I guess maybe at a different point in time in that timeline, or was it just an outright different timeline? I wasn't sure. I thought it was an outright different timeline, but it sounded like they were referencing it as timeline 23, even though they didn't really have magic and all that. But it's like, by the time we checked, they did have magic, not less things have changed subsequently since, well, the beast is dead and everything. So it's actually kind of sad, because like pretty much all of the main cast is dead in that in timeline 23. I mean, literally everyone, because the only person not dead in that situation is Penny and Morena, you know. So it's kind of sad. I mean, there's no telling who else. Yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting thing to think about, just because it's like, another thing that went down in this episode is the whole Quentin situation. It was kind of interesting, because we saw that the thing inside of Elliot is basically getting caught up in all his vices, like drinking a lot, as well as wanting to take pills and stuff like that. A lot of Elliot's addictions and stuff like that, you know. I guess because, let's not forget, Elliot wasn't kicking it on Earth for such a long time. I guess maybe he was handling his vices, but him being king kind of kept him in line with his vices, like his strong will. But the monster kind of seemed like it got consumed. I guess, like, even as strong as it is, its will kind of gets easily taken by Elliot's, or maybe somewhere on the inside you can make the argument that's Elliot fighting back in a certain regard. But it was actually surprising, because Quentin stood up to it and was like, the fact of the matter is, if you don't stop this, go ahead and kill me. But because the fact of the matter is, if you kill Elliot, implying that they know that he lied about Elliot not being alive anymore. But I guess maybe the monster kind of interprets that as just like, oh, you want me to keep his body alive, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe it is on the know, like, oh, you know, I was lying about him not be. Or maybe legitimately the creature thought he was dead too, not realizing like, oh, Elliot's actually still alive and everything. Either way, but Quentin standing up and being like, if anything happens to him, because he's very important to me. And now part of me is going like, is it stemming? It has to be stemming from that timeline where you were together. So it's kind of like you realize how you feel about him, knowing that timeline. Knowing, it isn't. I don't know if it's just a friend situation. I think it might be kind of a love situation. Where just like, man. I mean, I feel like that'd be the driving force behind doing something like that. It isn't just about saving a friend. It might be saving someone that that in a different timeline you were in love with. You started a family. You were happy together. So that speaks volumes. And so I love the monster being like, okay, fine, I'll take better care of this body. You don't have to be such a baby about it. I also love that because he was so drunk, he couldn't be helpful when they're trying to track down other gods. But he ends up resurrecting a zombie because it's like, oh yeah, there's some stuff about Egypt. You know that, right? He's like, yeah, but I'm kind of drunk right now and it's kind of messing with my head, so I can't be very helpful tracking down this god we need to be finding. And so they end up, because there's a god, Heka, that they were trying to track down who might have a piece to this body situation, but already dead, and the piece is buried somewhere else. But they ended up resurrecting a mummy, and then just even Quentin's like, man, even with his degenerated body and stuff, his essentially his hieroglyphic work was amazing. And he was trying to talk, and Julia's like, what is he saying? And the monster being like, cut him some slack. He took a hook to the face. Of course, he's going to have a little bit of a kind of a speech impediment type of situation. I also love that when it's all there, like when it's all done, the monster leaves, and then like Quentin and Julia are standing there with the mummy, and they're like, "Oh, what do we buy?" And it kind of waves them off, and it's just standing there, which I'm kind of like, "Oh, I wish you kind of took the mummy with you." It's like, what's going to happen to him? Will the spell wear off, or will he stay completely resurrected from now on? I hope we get to see our mummy buddy again soon. That'd be pretty dope. I just love that being a thing. It is kind of interesting because their storyline kind of ties into Alice's, and that's what's kind of making me think of like all of it kind of tying together, because Alice is kind of like, oh yeah, magic kind of has its downsides, but then you have like Julia being like, the fact is that it's kind of like going up against gods has a tendency to not work for them, and it's like, yeah, every time they've ever done it, it's literally fucked them over in some shape or form. So it's kind of interesting too, just kind of a weird side note. The fact is that like Julia's whole situation of not being able to use magic, but she's invulnerable and everything. Quentin makes a reference to Emma Frost, which that whole thing is funny and kind of interesting, to me, because it's like I literally had a bit of a conversation about Emma Frost literally yesterday because I was talking about the Gifted season finale. It's just a whole thing. I just thought it was kind of interesting that he just happens to reference Emma Frost too. So, but nevertheless, I'm very interested to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.